thank you to everybody who's been in touch. Lots of controversy about the Boris booing issue. A lot of people don't think he was booed. He was. The evidence is there. I'm sorry, it was right in front of us. The Lonely Ranger, Chris, has been in touch saying Boris was booed, quite rightly. Remember the iconic image of the Queen sitting alone at her husband's funeral while the night before Johnson and the other idiots were partying the night away. Totally justified. The Cybele Snipe says Johnson was being booed by a handful of activists, seen as the end of his tenure by a rabid media desperate to get their man. MK Steve has been in touch as well to say, I'm listening to your broadcast with no visuals. When you played the clip of Boris arriving, if I didn't know what that clip was, I'd say someone just met a hostile crowd for sure. Well, let's play the clip again. For those watching on Talk TV, it's simply Boris Johnson with loads of crowds around him walking up the steps to St Paul's Cathedral. You can see the guards there, many military people, and it's Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson walking up. Let's listen. And then just walking into St Paul's Cathedral there. So Jason Reid is with us, and Jason is, of course, the UK lead at Young Voices and a political commentator in his own right. You've got your little Union Jack flag on there. Jason, you're celebrating the Jubilee weekend as well, like me.
Absolutely. I think I'm overshadowed by this fantastic studio setup we've got.
We've got her bumping up, got her on right, and rightly so. I mean, there are conspiracy theorists who say that Boris Johnson was not booed. He absolutely was booed.
It does very much sound like booing and jeering. There's no way to get around that, and it is surprising because this is not a crowd you would have thought would necessarily.
These are people who camped overnight. These are people who were there for the. I mean, these are people who. I'm not saying every royalist is necessarily a Conservative voter. Of course not. That's not the way things are. But these are not people who are not patriotic. They're very patriotic. They're probably some of the most patriotic people in the country, yet there they are booing the Prime Minister. Clearly they disagree with him on a number of things. Maybe, his wife was there as well. Do you think that might have been a factor?
I think it might be. I think maybe this is a fringe case of the kind of realignment we're seeing in British politics as well, where some of the more metropolitan areas are tending towards the Liberal Democrats in a lot of cases. We've got a by-election coming up that might confirm that, and it seems like in some senses the new Tory heartlands now are the Red Wall, which very recently were Labour, because that kind of middle class or upper class is shifting away from the Conservative Party. Of course, we have a lot of anger about Partygate as well, but I think this is now coming to a point where we'll see next week what happens if there is a no confidence vote, but it's coming.
But this is all over the papers. You've looked at the I newspaper, and Boris says, "Without me, you lose." I mean, is that correct? I'm not sure it is.
I think at this stage he might be right. I sort of resent saying that, but because we're so close to the next election now, at most 2 years away,
surely there's time for a new person if they were to come to establish themselves within that time frame, perhaps. No,
but it doesn't seem to me that anyone who's high up the list would be have the same Teflon qualities that Boris does and be able to hold on to the Red Wall. He's still associated with Brexit on a very personal level. He has an amazing track record of winning elections, and I'm not by any means a Boris fan, but I think if there is a vote of no confidence, he is likely to win it in a landslide, and that, of course, under Tory party rules, would cement his position for a year anyway. He can't have another vote of no confidence in that time, but more generally, I think it would make clear to his opponents within the party that he's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Very good point, very good point. There's a few points just on the booing. Let's read them out. Jane has been in touch, says, as you have said, this was a pool camera. My conclusion is that the camera was put near the booing folk on purpose, having seen what has been said about the Prime Minister recently, but let's forget the Prime Minister until after the Jubilee, says Jane. I suppose, would they have known people were going to boo or not? I'm not sure, Jane, but good point nonetheless. Brian in Southend has been in touch on text to say, Peter, per your earlier guest, Lord Vasey, is it really fair to suggest the Prime Minister is somehow responsible for rudeness to cleaning staff? Is there an individual responsible for all the behaviour in Talk Radio studios? There certainly is not, Brian, let me tell you. Yeah, we are all individuals, some more individual than others, Jason says, laughing. And Brian, you're absolutely right, actually. But that's a big question as well. Should we blame the Prime Minister for all that went on in Partygate, all the behaviour of staff? He's the head of things at Downing Street, and some people say he should, some people say he shouldn't. Frank in Bromley said, would you still be playing Boris's arrival and departure if folk had been cheering, says Frank. Frank, honestly, probably not, because, well, people expect the Prime Minister, I suppose, to be cheered or to be welcomed in some way. And another texter says, I don't know how you managed to hear booing in the Boris clip, but I certainly didn't. Utterly bizarre that you're so adamant about it. I promise you there are people booing. I mean, Jason, back me up here. I mean, I'm not lying.
You're not lying, and I find it very difficult to believe that the microphone or the camera were put there strategically as part of the pool broadcast. This is just what happened. Some people were very upset and decided to use that moment to express their displeasure. I think it's not a great thing when we have politics interfering in events like the Jubilee. This is the kind of thing we need to be keeping politics out of, but, you know, it was a crowd of people. You're going to have people making noise sometimes, and there was clearly booing and jeering at Boris, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid.
So we've moved from parties to booing, says Lucy. For God's sake, is Peter Cardwell at all obsessed? So what? I'm not obsessed with booing or parties, Lucy. I'm obsessed with politics because my job is the political editor of the session, so it's my job to be obsessed with politics and what is going on. But let's talk about the royals. Let's get back to the Jubilee because it's interesting. Prince Andrew had COVID. I'm sure there are probably not too many people necessarily having a huge amount of sympathy for him, although I had COVID, and I can honestly tell you it's not a nice thing, so I don't want anybody to get COVID. But what did you make of the sort of the lineup? You had Charles on the balcony there, the whole Harry and Meghan aspect of things. What's your take on the last few days, Jason? And of course this is in all the papers right across them today.
Well, there's a huge amount of different storylines going on within the royal family. It's almost like they're setting it up for a few seasons down the line of The Crown on Netflix, just making all these things happen, because you've got the very gradual accumulating of duties that's happening with Charles. You've got Prince Andrew, I would say very conveniently, getting COVID at the last minute, but of course we don't want to speculate.
Maybe he was given it by the booing crowd, you know.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, we may or may not have been booing.
Conspiracies overlapping there. That's and then, of course, you've got Harry and Meghan, who, at least so far, have acted in a very dignified way. They didn't insist on sitting on the front row, like, by the way, Prince Andrew did at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, despite all the scandals that were going on.
I mean, it was his father.
It was his father, but at the same time, you know, it's Prince Harry's grandmother who's being honoured this weekend, but he still decided to step back given everything.
Yeah, that was the right decision, really, wasn't it?
I think it probably was.
They're not full-time royals, really, anymore. And, I mean, how have you been celebrating the Jubilee yourself, Jason?
I'm going to be watching TalkTV's coverage, naturally.
Obviously.
I'll head down to St James's Park. I've been promised by some friends some very patriotic food. I don't know what that means.
What is patriotic food? I don't know.
I've got no idea at all. And presumably pork pies or something. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
Union Jacks stuck in the top, perhaps, on a cocktail stick.
Well, you've got your little badge on, which is great as well. We're going to talk after the break with Jason a bit more about what's in the papers. There's not Jubilee related. We're going to talk about the cost of living, about the airport chaos, and a few other stories as well. Frank in Newbury says, pantomime, booing the PM, pantomime villain comes to mind. Just saying, Frank in Newbury. Thank you very much indeed for that. Paul Green says, sounds like a few people booed and then others cheered to drown them out. Maybe like me, surprised that some people tried to hijack the event, says Paul, who got in touch at TalkTV on Twitter. Thank you very much indeed for doing so. Thanks to Mrs. O as well, and probably not Sharon Osborne, who says, I can't hear the booing. I hear whistles, I hear clapping, I hear an undercurrent humming, but not anything I would identify as booing. To clarify, I don't care whether he was or he wasn't. I just didn't hear it. Well, there we go. Well, we've played the clip twice now. I'm afraid I can't really help you any further on that one. But thank you very much indeed for your tweet. And Ray says, great show, PC. Thanks, Ray. Some people don't like me, you, and Boris. That's life, I suppose, says Ray. Yeah, I mean, it is. That's what people say. Thank you to Ash, who says there was definitely booing as well as cheering. I think it exposes the cracks in politics and differences in views on the Prime Minister at the moment. Great show as ever. Thank you for helping me through revision. Oh gosh, Ash, you've got exams coming up, have you? Tweet us again, let us know what exams you have coming up, because there's so many GCSEs and A-levels, and of course there are exams in universities as well. My friend Lucia is doing exams at her university as well, so there's quite a lot. Les says, apparently everyone was set to boo the Scottish First Minister and her squire, but nobody actually recognised who they were. Hashtag Platinum Jubilee, my goodness. And we'll be back with Jason Reid for more of his paper review in just a few minutes here on TalkTV. Thank you to Theo, who's been in touch to say, I hold no affection for royalty. As a Republican, I find the concept of royalty bizarre, but the occasion at St Paul's is not the time or place to indulge in such childish behaviour. I am a royalist, I'm not a Republican, but I agree with you. I think that's a very good point. There was booing of Boris Johnson, says Lord Mal on Twitter, but that crowd also cheered when Sadiq Khan arrived. That tells you where their political loyalties lie. Yeah, I mean, that may well be the case, of course. George says, you keep saying getting those allegedly booing queued all night and are patriots? How do you know they aren't simply anti-Boris campaigners and turned up to cause this issue? Can't hear any booing, just cheers. Hashtag booze. George, to get anywhere near St Paul's Cathedral at that time, there were thousands, tens of thousands of people. I mean, it's not out of the question, but it would take quite a lot of dedication. I think Jason Reid will agree with me here. It would take quite a lot of dedication to turn up just to boo Boris, taking the place of many people who wanted to be there for the Jubilee. It's a weird one.
There are some Boris fans who seem to think that the Boris bashers are very, very determined and willing to go to all these lengths just to get their booing heard in the pool broadcast. I don't think that's really the case. It's just they got lucky. The people at the front of the crowd happen to be have those feelings about Boris and want to express it.
Indeed, there's. I mean, as I learned from 3.5 years in government, it's mostly cock-up, rarely conspiracy. Thank you to Ruth in Newton Stewart, who has sent me, in County Tyrone, who has sent me a picture of her patriotic food. Jason Reid there, we're talking about patriotic food. She has sent me a picture of caramel corgi mousse cakes, which she will be enjoying, no doubt, with her family. So Ruth, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the Jubilee weekend. I hope you're having a nice weekend. Jason Reid is still with me. Jason is the UK lead at Young Voices and a political commentator. Let's not talk any more about the Jubilee, because we're talking a lot about the Jubilee in this programme. Let's talk about the fact that a pint is now £8 in some places. £8 for a pint of beer.
Absolutely incredible. Dawn of the £8 pint is the headline in the Daily Mail. It should be said this is not representative. This is the top end of the scale.
Yes, so this would be in London or somewhere really expensive like that.
The bar isn't named, but it is a London bar.
£8 for a pint of beer.
Prices are climbing across the board. There's a well-known coffee chain that is now charging £3.30 for a small flat white. Food and drink prices in particular are skyrocketing as a result of inflation, as a result of the war in Ukraine, and so this is going to hit the cost of living really, really high. Already is hitting the cost of living.
We're going to talk to Alex Proud, who's a bar and restaurant owner, just after the 11 o'clock news, actually, and it's interesting because it's not just the food, it's the staffing issues as well. Do you think Rishi Sunak's done enough?
I don't think he has. It feels like this government is just kind of kicking the can down the road.
They've put a lot of money into it. I mean, they've put billion, sort of 15, 16 billion pounds recently into it.
It's a huge amount of money.
And is it the government's rule to subsidise people? I mean, what do you think?
It's a difficult one. It's an issue that doesn't really have a solution, but it does feel like this giving out cash payments every now and then, or giving a small council tax rebate and that kind of thing, is just putting a sticking plaster on the wound. It's not going to heal. It's not going to help deal with the longer-term consequences. When I say longer-term, we're still just thinking 2 or 3 years in the future. It looks like we're heading towards a recession. It looks like, well, goodness knows if inflation is going to keep on climbing and where or when it's going to peak. And so a few £100s here and there, when energy bills and food bills are going up as much as they are, doesn't seem like it'll make a huge amount of difference for the people who are struggling most.
And there are people who are struggling and have put a lot of money into travel this half term as well, because apart from your mortgage, if you happen to have a mortgage, going abroad, going on a trip, even a few days or your main summer holiday is usually one of the biggest financial decisions you make, and people have been absolutely hammered, their bags uncollected for 3 days, a third of people still avoiding the crowds, half of people wearing masks. I'm very, very interested in the airport chaos kind of aspect of this this Jubilee weekend, because we haven't had such a sort of long half term for many people for quite a while, and this just continues.
It does. The airline industry was one of the hardest hit during COVID, of course, because people could not travel, and so now we've got for the first time in a while, we're heading towards a really no-holds-barred summer holiday where everyone's going to be wanting to travel, everyone's going to be wanting to go abroad if they possibly can, and yet we haven't even got there yet. We're still in early June, and already we're seeing this chaos at airports. It seems like a lot of the issue is put down to staffing, lack of investment going into actually getting the staff in the places where they're needed at the times where they're needed, and so these incredible stories in the papers. The Daily Express saying that, as you said, bags sitting there for 3 days uncollected. Some passengers at Manchester Airport getting so desperate they actually climbed onto the carousel to try to get into the back room where the baggage was being loaded.
Dangerous. I mean,
it is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
You can understand the frustration. It was hours and hours on end they were waiting there, missing. Goodness knows whether they're missing trains or just desperate to get home tired after a long holiday, and people offering to help load the bags themselves if that would speed up the process. It seems that there's no solution other than just putting more money into this and hiring the people where they're needed.
How can you sell all these flights? I mean, it's different. Like, I've been for years I've been taking the sort of Belfast to London flight, and sometimes they oversell them. 3 or 4, they say to people, look, we'll give you £150 or something if you don't take the flight, we'll put you on the next flight. You know, they sometimes offer compensation, and that's maybe sort of 3 or 4 people. But I mean, to sell whole flights that then aren't going, I mean, surely they must be able to predict what's happening. It's pretty dishonest, isn't it?
It is, and it's a bit all over the place at the moment. I had to fly to America last month, and most of the flights I was on were almost completely empty. Whereas we have the opposite situation here, where they seem to have booked far too many people and end up cancelling flights at the last minute. There have been some stories of people actually on the plane, and then they're told that their flight's going to be cancelled, and they have to get off the plane again.
They're actually sitting on the plane,
sitting on the plane, waiting for the announcement.
It's horrendous. I mean, it's fine for. I mean, I'm a single man, but I mean, if you've got little kids and stuff, and they're so excited about their holiday, you're on the plane, or if you're a nervous flyer as well, and you're sort of sitting there thinking, oh gosh, it's about to take off. I've taken my pill to kind of calm myself down or something. I mean, that's awful.
Exactly, yeah. As with the cost of living we were talking about, people will have put money into their flights, but people will have booked hotels for their holidays, maybe booked
parking,
resorts, everything like that. And all of it goes out the window. All this chaos, they would have booked time off work. All of this chaos is caused.
And you're never going to get all of that money back, are you?
Never. And this is why, I mean, lots of people have been talking about the importance of planning your holiday as best as you can and getting travel insurance if you possibly can, because it does make a huge amount of difference.
Well,
and it seems like you're using it at the moment.
There's a story in the Times that you've seen on page 16 about long social distancing. This is about people still wearing masks, still avoiding crowds, possibly still, I've heard of people still shielding, actually. I mean, people who haven't been out of the house really for 2 years. What do you make of this story? What is it saying?
Well, if people are shielding, I would assume those people are clinically vulnerable, and so they have some particular reason. In that case, there's a bit of a grey area. We can have, sympathy with that. Nobody wants to be in that situation. But I think this is really worrying stats in this article in the Times about well over half of people still wearing masks at some point on public transport or in shops and things like that. Lots of people avoiding crowds altogether just because they're not comfortable being in among a large number of people, even though all the science says that because of the mutation of COVID, because we've got different variants, it's nowhere near as deadly as it once was. There is no need at all. We don't have lockdowns. We don't have restrictions on crowds or large events or anything like that. There's no actual material reason for people to be so scared of COVID in this way, but because we had, for the first time in our lifetimes, this panic about pandemic and this immense restrictions and lockdown and change of the way we live our lives, people have forgotten how to go back to normal. People have forgotten what it means to live a normal life, to go to a crowd and to go on a bus without wearing a mask. And so we're kind of stuck.
Sort of conditioned into this, really.
Exactly, yeah. And then we have panic about monkeypox, and, there was the first case in Britain, and people already were talking about, are we going to lock down because of monkeypox? No, of course not. We need to resist this kind of lockdown and restrictions being the go-to grabber policy kind of response.
And also with monkeypox, you need skin-to-skin contact. You're not going to get it unless you have skin-to-skin. I don't know about you, but when I walk down the street, I don't tend to have skin-to-skin contact with people I'm walking down the street with.
That is a matter of routine.
No, indeed. Now, the Telegraph is saying there's a Mediterranean diet that could help depressed young men. We're going to be talking about male depression a little bit later in the programme. Well, how could a Mediterranean diet help?
This is a good question. This is a scientific study from Australia, which suggests that if you eat healthier food, effectively fruits and vegetables and fish and grains and things like that, that has a positive effect on your mental health and can help deal with depression, which I'm sure it does. But at the same time, coming from an Italian family, I can tell you that it's not necessarily as healthy as you always think it's going to be.
Depends on how much of it you eat, actually, which leads us to the next story in the Daily Star, so it must be true. Page 7, people with beer bellies have been dumped. Tell us what the Daily Star is saying here.
Yeah, I thought this would fit together on a nice theme. It says that there's a new study out that says that if you have a beer belly, if you have a pot belly, then you're much more likely to be broken up with as a result of that. It says that a large proportion of people who have a beer belly have been broken up with just because of that. I'm very sceptical.
Citing the beer belly. I mean, surely you would know before. I mean, if you go out with someone, they will, most of the time, unless it's sort of 25 years you've been with them or something, they develop a beer belly. But if someone were to go out with me now, they would see that I'm, a bit of a chunky monkey.
Well, if you have a 25-year relationship, presumably it's deep enough, substantial enough that you're not going to dump them because they've put on a bit of weight after all that time.
Well, one would hope so, Jason, anyway. Yeah. But, I mean, what scientific evidence is the Daily Star citing in this? I mean,
Well,
we know it's very much the paper of record.
It is, of course, the paper of record. It does seem like it is a survey that they are citing. I don't know whether people are just bitter about their ex and they want to, land all the blows that they possibly can.
Yes, it's my beer belly. It's not the point that it's not the fact that I'm, intolerable to live with, or...
Yeah, I was a serial cheater, but it was his beer belly that caused the problem, not me.
Indeed. Jason Reid, UK lead at Young Voices and political commentator, thank you very much indeed for your paper roundup. Really appreciate it. Loads